You ever catch a whiff of gardenias on a lazy July afternoon and feel memory slip its warm hand into yours? That's what happened to me today, sitting on my front porch swing here in Cedar Hollow, Georgia, rockin' real gentle, watchin' the heat shimmer over the red clay road. A hush fell, broken only by the cicadas sawin' away, when the wind fetched me the scent of fresh lilies and pine polish, the very perfume of the parlor where I lay like a porcelain doll once upon a time. Now listen, sugar, if my ramblin' lands soft on your ears, be a dear and tap that little thumbs up, drop me a comment, maybe even subscribe, so this old soul knows you're sittin' with me, much obliged. Anyhow, the moment that smell curled around me, it was as if someone snapped a picture and slid it into a Viewmaster. Bright and awful clear, white candles flickerin', Reverend Calvin clear in his throat, my children rustlin' in stiff Sunday black. I remember thinkin', Margie Sue Watkins, what on earth are you doin' inside that satin box while the world keeps tickin'? Couldn't move a muscle, mind you, but I heard every whispered reckoning, every brittle laugh, every accusation folks never dared lay at my feet while my heart was still pumpin'. Dean stood there tall and tight as a fence post, tellin' the cousins how mama never once let him off the hook for daddy's tractor wreck, as if sorrow had written its name in my cookbook margins on purpose. Linda, bless her tender silence, sat like a stone angel, hands knotted in her lap, but the river behind her eyes was full to burstin'. And my baby Maggie, wind-blown from Colorado, cheeks chapped pink, she kept reachin' toward the casket like she was tryin' to tuck in a stray lock of my hair just once more. All of that thunder clattered in my chest while on the outside I lay smooth and still, lashes glued, lips painted a shade nobody ever saw me wear. I tell you, in those long minutes between hymns and eulogies, I took stock like a farmer counting hay before a storm. Every sharp word, every call I skipped, every kindness I swallowed for pride. And there, flat on my back beneath a spray of plastic magnolias, I started conversin' with the good Lord, low and ragged, a skin, why love sometimes wears its work clothes and forgets to tidy up before supper. But that gardenia lily sent floatin' across my porch today. Why? It was the latch that opened the attic of that memory again, and all the dust motes of regret came twinklin' down through the beams. I thought I had tucked that day away like last season's seed packets, yet here it is sproutin' fresh and vivid as cucumber vines in July. So, sweetheart, pull your chair a mite closer, pour yourself a glass of sweet tea, and sit quiet with me a spell, because what comes next ain't all gloom. There's light hid in the shadows, and even a hush puppy of humor. It's a tale about hearin' what folks truly think once they reckon you're gone, about wonderin' whether the truth frees you or ties you tighter than a kudzu vine. And it's about learnin' a tad late, maybe, but learnin' nonetheless how forgiveness can bloom even when the soil's been neglected. So tell me true, if you could eavesdrop on your own farewell, would you stride out lighter or find yourself tangled in thorns? Stay with me, darlin', and I'll lay it all out, the sweet and the sour, just as slow and plain as sunrise over the peach orchard at dawn. If I close my eyes, sugar, I can still feel the sun-baked planks of our farm porch under my bare feet. Summer of '55, when I was a sprout of 11 with braids swingin' like church bells and more freckles than sense. Our place sat 3 dusty miles outside Cedar Hollow, Georgia, where the fields yawned wide as a Sunday stretch, and the sky felt so big you could almost hear it hum. Daddy rose before the rooster, clatter of the screen door, smell of chicory coffee, and Mama followed with hair pin tight and a hymn floatin' soft on her breath. I'll fly away, carryin' through the kitchen while she stirred grits and cracked fresh eggs from our own hens. Lord, back then the rhythm of life was steady as the tick of the mantel clock. Milk the cow at dawn, haul water from the well, race the neighbor boys down the dusty lane, then back home by noon to shuck corn under the shade of the pecan tree. On Saturdays I'd pester Daddy to hitch the mules so I could ride up front, dust pluming behind us like we were steamin' locomotive kings. He'd tip his straw hat and say, "Margie Sue, hold on tight, life's a bumpy track." Sundays meant starch-stiff dresses, pine-scented hymnals, and Reverend Bailey's thunder. Though my mind wandered past stained glass to dreams of far-off places I traced with trembling fingers on the county map tacked behind Mama's flour tins. Evenings we gathered round the radio, the glow of its dial warm as peach cobbler, listenin' to the Grand Ole Opry while Mama quilted and Daddy mended harness leather. I'd sprawl belly down, sketchin', my secret wish to become a nurse so folks could feel safe the way Mama's cool hand on a fevered brow made me feel. Back then I believed kindness was a seed you dropped in every passerby's pocket, certain it would sprout one day and blossom right back at you. I truly thought folks, like migratin' geese, always found their way home. Trouble and sorrow were words grown-ups used in hushed tones after supper, but to me the world was gumdrop bright, fireflies in mason jars, biscuits sopped in cane syrup, Daddy's baritone driftin' over the porch rail as he told tales of his own Daddy Bravin, the boll weevil years. I kept a diary in a dog-eared school notebook, scribbling big looping letters that said things like, "One day I'll see the ocean," and "I'll never let the folks I love feel lonely." At night I'd lie under a patchwork quilt Mama's mama stitched during the war, watch moonlight crawl the ceiling, and promise the Lord I'd stay gentle no matter how rough life's plow might cut the ground. I remember the county fair that autumn, the smell of kettle corn, the Ferris wheel creakin' against a harvest moon, and some boy named Jimmy Joe pressed a paper rose in my hand, said it matched my hair ribbons. I floated home 1 inch off the earth. The very next week Daddy's tractor flipped in the lower field, and childhood's dreamy lace tore like a feedsack on barbed wire, but even that day I clung to the notion that goodness outlasts grief. So when I lay there years later in that pine-paneled funeral parlor, listenin' to folks speak their piece, a part of me was still that barefoot girl with dust between her toes and hope sproutin' in her pockets. And that, my friend, is why the memory refuses to hush. It's the echo of a promise I made to be kind, to believe folks circle back, and I need to know if I kept it true. You ever be minnin' your own business, sugar, and feel the very air tilt like God reached down and nudged the scene a few inches sideways? It was early spring of '63, dogwoods bloom crazy, the first fair of the season set in up on the high school football field, and I was 17, all knees and nerves, still mopin' over Daddy's tractor mishap, yet tryin' to chase the sorrow clear by sellin' church bake sale pies. The sky glowed that hopeful cornflower blue, and the scent of funnel cakes drifted round like a kindly arm. I just wiped powdered sugar off my cheek when I heard a laugh deep, honey-rich, like it knew the punch-line of life itself. I turned, and there stood Charles Henry Watkins, fresh home from the Navy, sleeves rolled, grease under his nails from tunnin', the carnival generator so the Ferris wheel lights wouldn't flicker come dusk. He had eyes the color of creek glass and a grin that said he'd tussled with trouble and come up smilin'. The moment our gazes locked felt like a porch screen slammin', sudden, sharp, impossible to ignore. I couldn't for the life of me explain why my heart jumped like a bullfrog on a hot skillet, but there it was, thumpin' loud enough I feared the minister's wife might hear. Charlie tipped his cap, called me Miss Margie Sue, though we'd never met, and asked if my peach pie was as sweet as my smile. I near dropped the whole tin. We talked, Lord, did we talk, about Chattanooga shipyards and pecan harvests, about Hank Williams records and whether the new interstate would bring tourists or just trouble. He told me engines listened better when you spoke kind to 'em, and I reckoned that went for people too. By sundown he'd won me a plush bear at the ring toss, and while the Magnolia Moon boys played crazy arms, we danced on grass worn thin by cleats, my shoes scuffin', his laugh rumblin', and the world shrank to the size of that waltz-in shadow. Next mornin', Mama found me at the kitchen window hummin', "You Are My Sunshine," watchin' cardinals hop the fence, and she knew some switch had flipped. Charlie started callin' on Sundays, drivin' a beat-up Ford that smelled of red dirt and motor oil. He'd lean against the doorframe, hat in hand, talkin' soft to Mama about honor and hard work, then glance my way with a spark that near lit the curtains. He read every line of my diary dreams without peekin' at a single page. Soon enough letters came postmarked USS Franklin County, folded neat as hospital corners, stories of moonlit decks and Atlantic spray. I kept M tucked in my Bible next to Proverbs about trust. Each envelope felt like a dare to believe my life could stretch beyond county lines. When his ship finally docked for good, he proposed under the water tower, said we'd grow old teachin' our kids to catch fireflies. My yes spilled out quick as creek water over stones, even though fear whispered about what war leaves behind in a man's quiet hours. I didn't understand then how a single laugh on a fairground breeze could reroute generations, how that choice would hand me love and loss in equal measure, 3 children, a farmhouse filled with music, and one rainy evening years later when a faulty throttle on Charlie's tractor took him quick as a snuffed candle leaving Dean Fumine at fate, and me wonderin' if I'd leaned too heavy on kindness and not enough on caution. But that first heartbeat jolt, that sudden tilt of spring air, is the hinge on which every chapter since has swung. Whenever I sift through the echoes inside this satin-lined box, I come back to that laugh, like the bell my soul rang to start the rest of its song. And I reckon the good Lord sometimes raps forever in 5 seconds, so sweet you hardly notice forever's teeth. When Charlie shipped back out in the blister of 65, the barn still smelled of fresh-cut hay and jasmine, honeymoon laughter hangin' in the rafters like paper lanterns, and I carried his goodbye like a smooth stone in my apron pocket, knockin' against every single heartbeat. Folks at the Piggly Wiggly asked after me and I'd grin wide as a watermelon slice. Watkins women keep their shoulders squared, but nights stretched longer than a gravel road, and the hush inside our clabbered house grew so wide even whippoorwills sounded lonely. Then, one scorchy August afternoon, the postman's Chevy rattled up the lane with a telegram flimsy as onion skin. Engine room explosion, serious injuries, request immediate family. My niece turned to buttermilk. Still, I packed a borrowed suitcase, tucked prayer cards between diapers, and rode the Greyhound 2 states north with Maggie napping on my lap and Dean and Linda staring hollow-eyed out the window. The Naval Hospital smelled of iodine and dread. Charlie lay swaddled in gauze, voice stranded somewhere nurses couldn't reach. Doctors spoke in clipped syllables, maybe tomorrow, maybe never, while fluorescent lights hummed like angry bees above our borrowed grief. I wanted to wail, but Cedar Hollow girls don't raise their voices, so the sorrow turned inward, hot as tar, settling where faith used to sit. Within a week he slipped away, and I came home holding a folded flag and 3 children blinking like chicks who'd lost their rooster. Grief doesn't tidy after itself. It tracked mud across my linoleum, rattled window panes, stole my sleep every blessed night. Money turned tight as new boots. Cotton prices sank. The tractor coughed without Charlie's coaxing. Every overdue bill felt like an accusation I couldn't answer. The bankman tipped his hat, said a government loan required Daddy's cosign. Pride bristled, but I swallowed it, hands shaking on the dotted line. Neighbors brought casseroles for 6 days, then their routines snapped back to trot, leaving me with 3 mismatched plates and a mountain of what-ifs. Dean, barely 10, tried to square his skinny shoulders and man the plow, I heard the muffled curse when the belt slipped, saw anger root behind his eyes, and shame pinched because I could mend buttons, but not that boy's Reich. Linda retreated into sketchbooks, drawing distant galaxies. I praised every star she colored, yet feared those planets were escape hatches from crumbs of real life. Maggie toddled room to room chirping daddy, and each time that word floated the splinters in my ribs shifted. Sundays I pinned on my good hat, sat pew 3 while Reverend Calvin preached lilies of the field, but bitterness buzzed louder than the sermon. Some whispered a woman runn't land alone was a skin for ruin. Others hinted a second marriage might patch things. Inside, 2 voices wrestled. One hissed, "You ain't enough, never were." The other cried, "Stand tall and fight." I wore both like ill-fitting shoes, lurching through chores with a smile stapled on. At gray dawn in November, the bank posted notice on our gate, 90 days to pay or vacate. I stood barefoot in dew-soaked grass, fury, fear, and a copper-tasting shame swirling till I didn't know which belonged to whom. Dean asked if we would lose Daddy all over again. The truth puddled in my throat while I stroked his hair. That morning carved a crack through my old belief that kindness alone could hold walls upright. I began learning, a lesson rough as corncob, that sometimes life answers prayers with foreclosure signs and burial flags, and you gotta choose whether to kneel or claw forward, one rough breath at a time. The day the bank man nailed that final notice to the porch post, the sky hung low and pewter, and I swear the wind itself held its breath. The kitchen clock, old oak Seth Thomas that had tick-tocked through every laugh and lullaby, let out one last click and simply quit. Like even gears and springs refused to witness what was comin'. I'd spent the dawn rustling figures at the table, pennies lined like mourners, but the sums wouldn't march into formation, and when Dean, 17 now and set raw with flame, slammed his fist against the pantry door hollerin' that I'd killed Daddy twice. Once by lettin' him climb that cursed tractor and again by losin' the only soil he ever loved. I felt the floor tilt the way a boat lists when ballast shifts. Linda stood in the doorway clutchin' her sketchpad to her chest, eyes wide as cellar moons, and Maggie, sweet Maggie, tried to lace her fingers through mine, though mine were shaken so bad it felt like holdin' a sparrow mid-flight. Outside, the auctioneer's voice cracked through a bullhorn, tack sharp against the hush inside. 40 acres, farmhouse, 2 barns, startin' bid $500. Neighbors I'd lent sugar to shuffled in the yard, hats twisted in guilty hands. One looked up at the attic window where my granny's quilt fluttered like a white flag. I should have marched out and clawed the sign down, but pride had already eaten the meat off my bones, leaving only brittle resolve. So I walked instead to Charlie's old workbench, where the oilcloth still smelled of him, and pulled from the drawer our marriage license, photographs of river picnics, one dried dogwood bloom pressed between Bible pages, memory relics suddenly weightless compared to the acreage being bartered off like excess luggage. The gavel smacked. Someone cheered. Dean's boots scraped the floor as he stormed past me toward the front steps, spittin' that he'd join the service just to get far from my failures. Blood roared in my ears, louder than any shell blast, and a scream rose up hot and ragged. Yet what slipped between my lips was no word at all, just a thin wounded whine. The sound of fox makes when steel jaws clamp shut. In that suspended second, I realized every promise I'd whispered under quilts about keepin' folks safe, about kindness seedin' its way back home, had split beneath drought and debt, and my children were left to harvest the stubble. The farm sold for less than Mama's wed-in band was worth, and as the buyer, some cousin of the bank manager, shook hands over the paperwork, I felt something inside me buckle, the way a porch board gives after years of termites. That night, with the house echoing hollow as a pumpkin shell, I laid Granny's quilt on the bare floor. pulled the children close and confessed through salt-slick whisper that I'd done all I knew, that sometimes the storm wins no matter how tight you nail the shutters. Linda wept silent into my shoulder. Maggie asked if Daddy could see us, and Dean stood apart, arms crossed like a barricade, but even he trembled when thunder rolled. In that darkness, I lost the last scrap of the girl who believed the world paid back kindness with dividends. What rose in her place was a steel-edged woman who would trade softness for survival, who'd smile polite at church, but keep love buttoned under starched collars. Yet buried deep beneath the new iron was a pulse of shame that never stopped drumming, because I knew the cost of that steel would echo long after the debt was cleared, and the echo would shape every prayer I dared after. In the hush before dawn, I promised God I'd keep walkin', but I also warned him, shaky and small, that I wasn't sure I'd recognize the gentle parts of myself if ever I crossed their path again. Winter of '69 found me sittin' in a one-room walk-up over Dot's Diner on Depot Street, the radiator knockin' like it was a skin forgiveness and the window pane shiverin' each time a freight train groaned past. The farm was gone, the red dirt turned under by strangers, and all that hush after the auction felt like the pale stillness that hangs over a field once a tornado has spun off toward the horizon, silent, breathless, debris glitterin' where sunlight strikes. I hired on washing dishes at Dot's from 4 in the morning till noon, then hemmed uniforms at the textile mill till my eyes watered thread blue, and in a lull between shifts I'd fold up inside myself the way a letter creases to fit a too small envelope. Dean was off at basic, his letters sharp and brief, as though each word cost more than pay stubs allowed. Linda took a room at Aunt Ruth's in Savannah for art school, but mailed me charcoal sketches of empty barns and faraway moons that told the truth louder than any syllable. Little Maggie shared my cot, her breath warm on my collarbone, and nights when she whispered, "Mama, when do we go home?" I could only stroke her hair and hum Amazing Grace, though the grace part felt like somebody else's coat draped over my shoulders, heavy, not quite mine. Sundays I still slipped into the back pew, but the hymns rang tinny, like the organ had lost its middle range. I'd bow my head out of habit, lips movin' round verses my heart no longer colored in. Folks said time heals, yet what I felt was closer to frost heave. The ground beneath looked solid, but deep down everything had shifted, crackin' foundations a touch at a time. The woman I'd been, soft-etched, brimful of notions about kindness boomerangin' back, she lived behind a glass wall now, visible but untouchable, and I moved through days deliberate as a clock pendulum, countin' beats instead of music. Evenings after work I'd brew chicory and sit on the fire escape, starin' at smokestack plumes smudgin' the twilight, lettin' the silence settle round me like first snow. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger burns hot and quick, but I did feel hollow, the sort of emptiness that echoes when you tap it, like a cracked crock, but still holdin' water. People around town assumed I was gettin' by fine. "Miss Margie's strong as hickory," they'd say, but strength can be a disguise you forget to take off, and some nights, once Maggie drifted to sleep, I'd press my palm flat to the wall, imaginin' I could feel the thrum of trains carry in other folks toward futures I'd once sketched for myself. Hope didn't vanish outright. It just curled small as a pill bug, waitin' for safer weather. One January dawn, as frost webs silvered the diner windows, I caught my own reflection, hair streaked iron, eyes tunneled with late shifts, and I thought, girl, you ain't the same soul who twirled barefoot under dogwoods, but maybe that's the price of stayin' upright when storms gut the rafters. I decided right then I'd keep on stitchin' what pieces remained, even if the quilt looked mighty different from the one Granny sewed. And so the years slid quiet, tips scraped into coffee cans, rent paid, Maggie growin', Linda wanderin' galaxies on canvas, Dean fightin', Wars both foreign and private. Life didn't offer apologies, only mornings. But each sunrise I cracked the window of finger width to let in whatever fresh air dared, and I whispered, not loud enough for the upstairs neighbors to hear, yet plenty clear for heaven, Lord, I'll walk on today, though my shoes pinch something awful. Show me a patch of earth that's still worth plantin'. Whether he answered, I couldn't rightly tell, but the question itself kept my legs movin', and in that quiet stretch of years I learned survival has a hum all its own, a low, steady note you can't sing with friends or family. Only murmur under your breath, until one day it surprises you by harmonizin' with something softer, something like hope tryin' again. One March morning in '72, when dogwoods were just startin' to pop and the mill's 6 o'clock whistle scratched the sky, I was trudging up Dot's back stairs with dishwater steam still clinging to my hair. Halfway up I near tripped over an old gent perched on the landing, coat thin as lace, wrestlin' a busted harmonica. Boots rail dust gray, eyes river water blue, lonely as the hush between boxcars. Folks stepped around him. People often skirt trouble the way cats dodge puddles. I set my apron bundle down, offered the cornbread I'd packed for Maggie, and watched surprise kindle behind his tired smile. He tipped the harmonica toward me, said it once sang like church bells till the reeds cracked. Borrowin' Dot's screwdriver, I pried the cover, nudged each reed gentle as layin' a baby to sleep, and coaxed it into hummin' in the sweet by and by. The stranger's fingers trembled round the tune, and he looked at me like I'd stitched a tear in his soul. When the song ended, he pressed the harp into my palm. Pass the sound along, he whispered, trousers creakin' as he rose. I stood there a full minute, muffin crumbs loosening in my shaky hand, before he vanished down the alley. Angels don't carry licenses. That evening, after shifts and homework squalls, I sat Maggie on our cot and drew the harmonica across my lips. First came a wobble, then one bright note, sharp enough to shave sorrow. Maggie clapped, eyes wide as two new buttons, begging me to teach her. Each night we practiced under the single bulb, laughter mingling with tinny chords. Word of our portrayal concerts drifted down Depot Street, and by midsummer 3 neighbor kids were sittin', cross-legged blowin' squeaky versions of This Little Light of Mine. Their mamas leaned from windows grinnin', even Mr. Calhoun the butcher tipped his cap. One Saturday Reverend Calvin passed, heard our ragged band, and asked if we'd play the church picnic. Fear prickled performance meant eyes and judgment, but Maggie squeezed my fingers, whisperin', people need music, Mama, like they need biscuits. We practiced till cheeks ached. Picnic day the heat simmered, beast drunk on lemonade. Maggie led I'll Fly Away, and that meadow of folding chairs lifted in full-throated harmony. I felt something unfurl slow as morning glory vines, a softness I thought foreclosure had salted barren. Music birthed other stirrings. I remembered my childhood vow to nurse folks' hurts, so I inquired at the county clinic about volunteer work. The head nurse eyed my dishwater hands, asked if I could read a thermometer. I said I'd taken fever since Eisenhower was president. She put me on evening rounds, fetchin' water, studying new mamas, hummin' hymns while I'd change linens. Sometimes I paused at the nursery window, watchin' babies fist the air new as dawn. Pay was nil, yet I walked home lighter. Linda wrote that my letters sounded brighter, like someone turned the porch light back on. Dean, stationed overseas, asked for a tape of Maggie's plan for his squad, said they missed the sound of home. Standin' in that dim hallway, scent of antiseptic minglin' with choir memories, I realized hope hadn't died. It had hibernated, waitin' on a warm note to coax it out. The stranger's harmonica, slipped into my day like a penny tossed in a fountain, proved even dented things can hold a tune. I'm still cautious, loss once scorched me deep, but each breath through those reeds reminds me broken air can be reshaped into song. And that's reason enough, honey, to keep drawin' breath. Truth has a way of waitin' in the wings, sugar, quiet as a church mouse till one ordinary evenin' the curtain lifts and there it is center stage wearin' your best Sunday hat. Mine stepped into the kitchen the summer Dean came home on furlough with his little boy, Charles Henry, a 6-year-old hurricane of freckles who asked if fireflies were sky seeds God planted after dark. Dishes were stacked to drip dry. Maggie's homework fluttered on the table, and Linda's latest painting, an old barn sproutin' galaxies through its roof, leaned against the wall when that child tugged my apron and piped, "Grandma, why'd Daddy say the farm ghosted away?" The question split me open like a green peach. I tasted the bitter kernel of all I'd swallowed these 20 years. Foreclosure shame, Charlie's flag, Dean's flame. My own voice gone thin from singin' strength while livin' fear. I sent everyone to the parlor with sweet tea, then climbed the squeaky attic ladder and fetched the shoebox I'd kept buried beneath quilts. Bank notices yellowed brittle, Charlie's Dob tag, the harmonica stranger gave me, and the folded flag, still smelling faint of machine oil and sea wind. My hands shook so, papers snowed the floor, and tears I'd rationed in drops came sudden as summer rain. When I stepped back downstairs, the whole family hushed, even the clock seemed to lean in. I laid every relic on the table the way a preacher sets communion bread, and I told the plain, unvarnished story I'd hidden behind polite smiles, how debt strangled hope, how I'd signed papers I didn't understand, how pride barred me from a sken help, how the farm slipped away while I posed strong. My voice quavered, but I kept pourin', reckonin' confession is like drawin' poison, you got to cut deep enough. Dean's jaw tightened, ready to fire, yet I looked that grown man full in the eyes and said, "Son, I failed at holdin' land, but I never quit holdin' love, even when it bruised me to touch." The room stayed still as first snow. Linda reached for my hand, Maggie sniffed loud, and little Charles traced the bullet crease on Charlie's Dob tag, whisperin' "Grandpa brave." Finally Dean exhaled one long breath. I swear he'd been savant since he was 10, and his shoulders dropped like socks at market. No fireworks, just a gentle unclenching, enough. I gathered the papers, stepped onto the back stoop where twilight glowed pewter, and fed each page to the rusty burn barrel. Flames licked up debt figures, bank letters, and every ounce of shame inked on them. When the flag's edge warmed in my grip, I pressed it to my heart instead. Some memories deserve stitching, not ashes. Smoke curled skyward, fireflies winked approval, and I felt the click of a lock I'd carried so long I forgot it was there. Returning inside, I boxed the harmonica for Charles Henry, telling him music mends cracks in places doctors can't. In that moment I chose, clear as the North Star, to stop livin' as caretaker of old wreckage and start tendin' the soil still under my feet. A rented porch, but mine to sweep, grandbabies to spoil, neighbors to nurse. I did not rewrite the past. I simply laid it down so my hands were freed to cradle whatever dawn delivered. And let me tell you, darlin', the very next morning the kitchen felt lighter, as if the walls themselves sighed relief. I brewed chicory, humming the tune of my own rescue, and for the first time in decades the steam smelled not of survival, but of living. I had chosen forward, no pretenses, no regrets, just the long, honest road ahead, and the choosing was its own kind of prayer, whispered straight into the marrow where courage grows back green. Funny thing about hindsight, honey, it don't arrive in neatly folded lessons the way Sunday school leaflets do. It creeps in on porch light at dusk, settles on your lap like an old barn cat, and purrs truths you were too busy frettin' to hear. I used to think life was a ledger. Plant kindness, reap kindness, keep the columns tidy. But seasons and storms scribbled over those figures till the math looked more like music, full of sharps and flats, and I finally caught on that a soul's worth ain't tallied by what she holds, but by what she keeps reachin' to give, even when her hands come back empty. Look at me now, hair silver as frost on fence wire, wrinkles mapping every mile of sorrow and sweet, from barefoot daughter of red clay Georgia to widow, to diner dish scrubber, to harmonica nurse of night shift corridors. I once measured myself by acreage lost and promises broken. Today I measure in smaller, sturdier units. A grand boy's laugh ricocheting off kitchen walls, a neighbor's fever eased by a cool cloth. The way Maggie still slides her arm through mine on grocery runs like she's 6 again. I learned that regret is a mule. You can hitch it to every wagon of memory and let it drag you slow, or you can pat its flank, say that'll do, and walk on at your own brisk clip. I learned hurt doesn't cancel hope. They share the same bed most nights, but hope gets up earlier, puts the kettle on, and invites hurt to sit a spell until it softens. And I learned silence is heavy currency. Spend too much of it, and the people you love go bankrupt of understanding. So these days I speak plain, even if my voice quavers like a screen door in wind. If my years carry any lamp for you, it's this: the thing you fear confessing may already be known by those who cherish you, and speaking it aloud turns shame into shared weather. You still feel the rain, but there's company beneath the umbrella. So maybe, sweet listener, it's time you quit waiting for the sky to clear before you pack a picnic. Storms might circle all your life, yet sandwiches taste just as good under thunder as under blue. Maybe it's time you quit letting old failures rent space in your head when they never washed a dish or paid a bill. Maybe it's time you knocked on the door of that distant child, or cousin, or dream, and said, "Mind if I sit a minute?" 'Cause distance, I've found, is often just silence spelled sideways. You don't need a funeral hush to hear what folks truly think. You need courage to ask while your heart's still drummin'. And if the answer pricks, remember, a wound is only a door. Push through and you'll find fresh air on the other side. I reckon the biggest truth I gathered, laid up against all the sorrows and foreclosures and flag-folded goodbyes, is that love's dividends seldom land where you invested, but if you keep scatterin' seed, some bloom will find you. Maybe in a song from a stranger's harmonica, maybe in the quiet, "I'm proud of you, your grown boy finally risks saying," maybe in your own reflection when you catch yourself smilin' for no grand reason at all. So slide that worry off your shoulders, darlin', let your bones breathe, and step forward lopsided if you must. Roads are patient things, and they don't mind a traveler who limps now and then. Well now, sweetheart, we've rocked together clear from the scent of gardenias that first tugged me back to my own funeral, all the way through corn silk summers, foreclosure winters, and a harmonica that breathed new daylight into an old heart. And here we sit, just you and me, the evening cicadas tuning up outside my screen door, while steam rises gentle from my cup of chamomile. If my voice quivers a mite, it's only because gratitude's a wide river, and sometimes the current catches you off guard. I've told you what I've learned, that love can outlive the land it sprouted on, that regret is a mule best unharnessed at sunset, that hope will hunker down in the root cellar of your spirit till you coax it back with the simplest tune. But none of it means a lick unless it nudges something tender inside your own story tonight. So lean in closer, darlin', let me leave you with one last notion that still rustles my curtains on sleepless nights. Maybe the whole point of walkin' this red clay road is not to keep every promise spotless, but to keep our porch light burnin' bright enough for folks, and memories, and even lost loves to find their way home when the wandering's done. Which brings me to a question I can't answer alone, And I'm mighty curious what's stirrin' in your chest right now. Do you reckon true love, whatever shape it wore when it first knocked on your door, must always circle back? Or is its gift complete even if it passes only once? I'd be honored if you'd tell me down below in your own plain words. You just might study another soul who's scrawlin' by with doubts heavier than mine ever were. Because this tale isn't stitched solely from yesterday's calico, it's threaded into today, right here, breathin' alongside the glow of your screen. Each sunrise still hands me the choice to hum kindness into the cracks, and each sunset asks whether I've done my best to listen. And if you're wonderin' about Charlie, well, some dusks when the light slants amber through the pines and that old Seth Thomas clock ticks a half beat off, I could swear I feel his laugh ripple the curtains, same as the night we danced on carnival grass. Maybe it's memory, maybe it's mercy, but either way the corners of my mouth hitch up before I notice. So I'll keep the kettle warm, keep scatterin' songs into the hush, and trust that what's meant to return will find the path even if it takes the long way round, and what's meant to remain a sweet, aching echo will still teach me how to listen. Tell me, dear heart, is there a name or a moment you've been waiting on to walk back up your porch steps? And if it never does, will you light another lamp anyway? I'm all ears, and so's the night, so let your story tumble out. I promise this old porch can bear the weight. Sometimes, when the wind is just right, I almost believe Charlie remembers too, and that's enough hush-puppy of hope to carry me into tomorrow. Until then, may your own tomorrow arrive soft as dawn on a peach orchard, and may you never doubt that somebody somewhere is rootin' for you, this silver-haired woman in Georgia, most of all.